Hello everybody and welcome back to another reasonable price prediction, the series where we try to figure out where your favorite altcoins could be headed. Today we are back with Rune. If you like the content, consider leaving a like and let me know down in the comments what you want me to cover next. In this video, we're going to be comparing the recent price action that Rune has made from roughly November to about June, so about 7 months of price action. We're going to be comparing this to previous similar timeframes and similar price action. Now, it's important to define what we're actually looking for in our comparison. We can see I've drawn these two lines here, basically a support and a resistance. So ultimately, this is just a range that Rune operated in for a prolonged period of time. Again, approximately 7 months, from June to November. Surprisingly, this hasn't actually happened too often with Rune. If we take a look, we can see it's only actually happened about 4 times, including this current time, within reason. You could put a trend line here and a trend line here and say it operated within this range. That was going on for months and the range was extremely drastic. So excluding Bullrun timeframes, we've only had this 3 times before. What we've recently had is a range move of 75% to the upside, and this went on for about 32 weeks. Looking at the first time we saw Rune do this, we can see we moved into the range back in November and we exited the range back in June. And this took place over 29 weeks, and we saw a range move of about 120%. Again, note that we got a move to the upside, back down, move to the upside again, back down, back to the upside, and then we broke out. So if we actually compare these two moves, they are actually very similar. We get a move to the upside, back down, to the upside, back down, to the upside, and then this time we moved to the downside, whereas last time we just went straight up out of that range. But all in all, pretty similar. We got about half the volatility and a different outcome at the end. We moved to the upside, not to the downside. Do note as well that we left this range in June, similarly to how we left this one here in June too. We also moved into it in November. So again, time frames very similar, not just in terms of length of time, but also in terms of actual months that they moved into. This is exactly 4 years ago as well. So in terms of 4-year cycle, this one obviously fits the best and it doesn't look too dissimilar. Again, the key difference being that we broke out to the downside and also this ended basically on the halving, whereas we traded a bit longer after the halving. But, you know, a couple of weeks here, about 2 months here, it's not a huge difference. So a strong case for yellow. Now, looking at the second time Rune operated within a range for a prolonged period of time, we can see this is incorrect for some reason. Let me just readjust this really quickly. We can see that we spent 27 weeks within this range. Again, in terms of how we actually operated within the range, we moved up to the high, down to the low, back up to the high, and then moved up out of the range. What we've had recently isn't very similar to that. It's not as complex. We've moved up, we've moved down, we've moved up, we've moved down, we've moved up, we've moved down. Here we basically hit the up, hit the down, and then left the range. It took us a while to do this, 27 weeks, or half a year, however you want to look at it, but ultimately not very similar. The months that we moved into this range was June, and we left in December, so not really lining up in terms of seasonality either. The percentage move that we saw as well, the range that we operated within, was just under 200%. Again, not very similar to what we've recently had with 76, 77% of a move. The only thing here that's really comparable is the time frame, which was 27 weeks, but even that isn't as strong as this first example that was closer to the halving, had much more similar moves, much closer price action, and the same seasonality. So for me, I'm not really comparing the 2020 move here. I'm almost striking that. Finally, we're looking at our most recent move that we got back in 2023 or at the end of 2022. We can see we moved down into this range in September. So again, not similar to our November timeframe that we moved into, although it is only 2 months away. So there's a case to be made, or if you're willing to turn a bit of a blind eye to imperfect timeframes, which I think you should to a degree. Anyway, we moved down in September and we spend 38 weeks in total from when we move down into the range to when we break below the range. And note again, this comparison is important because it's the only time we've seen Rune break to the downside when operating within one of these ranges. In terms of our movement as well, the price movements, we can see that it's very similar to what we got recently. We come down, but we move straight to the upside, straight to the up. We come right back down, right back up again, right back up again. We move above the range high, which is a key difference to the other comparisons as well. They all operated within their range. This one moved just above, just wicked up to the upside, as we did recently. We then come back down into the range, wick down to the lows, but don't actually touch the lows. Same here, we wicked down to the lows, didn't actually touch them, move back up to the upside, move back up to the upside, and then break down and move out of the range. Note that while the first month that we moved into in September didn't line up with the November month that we moved up into this range, we broke down both these times in June. Here we broke down in June, and here we also broke down in June. Again, time frame isn't perfect, but so far neither of these time frames have been perfect. We can see this was 38 weeks. Here we traded for 32. In terms of the price volatility that we saw it was just south of 60%. Here we have 76%. So this one's actually the closest in terms of the price range that we've operated within, percentage-wise. So overall, a pretty strong comparison. However, if you want to shift the goalposts a little bit, if we go to 2024 and we bring it out to the low of about 39 weeks, we can see this was the low here. We can see that we also, back in 2023, bottomed out 39 weeks after we first broke into this range. Bit of a coincidence, but maybe nothing too solid. Another little thing to corroborate with this is that when we had this red week, we put in our low. We obviously had a green week and a second green week. If we take a look at what we had here, we had a green week, then a second green week, one red week, and then we basically traded downwards for about a month. If again, we trade downwards for about a month, that brings us to October time frame. That's when we started to see some strong movements from Rune. That would also line up with more or less a 2025 bull run, which coincides with the 4-year cycle. Again, this isn't hard evidence, but just an interesting little tidbit maybe, perhaps something worth knowing. Overall for me, if you were to ask my opinion, I would say we are most similar to 2023 and 2022, just because of the percentage move, because of the time frame, because of when we also put in this low. Now this could be invalidated very easily. If we break down below this, that point is null and void. So look out for Rune going below $3. If it does, what I just said is basically useless. But again, just in terms of the moves that we saw, this is the only comparison that we have where we broke to the downside. I think it's a pretty strong comparison case, but it's also worth looking at what we had 4 years ago as well. Now, one last point that I also want to point out, while we're on the US dollar chart, we can see that this purple line here is what's called the DXY. It's the strength of the United States dollars. So we can see that in bad times, when there's recession, when interest rates are being hiked, when there's general unrest in the global economy, a lot of people fly to US dollar because it's considered the safest asset to hold. So naturally that strengthens the dollar. So in bad times, we can see the strength of the dollar go up. And in good times, we can see the dollar slowly loses its strength, because people are willing to take on a bit more risk, and you can't really make any money just holding dollar, so you eventually need to move out of dollar. The strength of the dollar is currently very similar to what we saw back here in 2024. They are at similar levels. We can see this wick that we got in March of 2020 is basically the same price that we're currently trading at. And again, just note that when the dollar is weak, Rune does really well. We move from this high to this low, and Rune soon put in its all-time highs on this move down of the dollar. We can see recently, back at the end of 2022, the dollar was extremely strong. It lost a lot of its strength, and suddenly Rune rocketed up because of that. Do note though that it didn't react immediately. The dollar dropped quite a lot, and while Rune had a little small rally, it didn't really respond until about 4 or 5 months later, and then it rallied up. But again, all these strong moves that we saw with Rune were all on crashes of the DXY, sudden drops in value. Rune went up. So note that we are most likely going to see a weaker dollar as time goes on, and that is because of basis points, which if I also pull up here, we can see basis points are measured on the left. Basis points are currently very high, and depending on what other countries do, this can either strengthen or weaken the dollar. A lot of other countries start cutting rates before America, so this does oftentimes keep the dollar strong. So note that even though basis points can come, this can actually strengthen the dollar. So again, even though America might be cutting rates, that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll have a weaker dollar. It can actually mean we have a stronger dollar, which means it's harder for assets to move up against a strong dollar. A weak dollar is easier to outperform than a strong dollar. However, most likely, I do think we will see some kind of a move down to the downside like we did here. And again, when we got these lows, when basis points were low, and that allowed the dollar to weaken, money was being put into assets, it was moving out of dollar, that's when we saw Rune putting in its all-time highs. And in my opinion, that's what we need to see Rune move back to those all-time highs. Anyway, that's enough with the US dollar. Let's take a look at the Bitcoin pair. Again, a similar scenario to what we were doing with the US dollar pair. We're going to be comparing previous oscillations or moves that Rune has made and put them up to what we've currently had. Again, looking very quickly at what we've currently had, we've seen a drop from the weekly closes. We've seen a drop of 70% from down to where we were a few weeks ago, which is the low that Rune has seen this year. And this took us 40 weeks. Taking a look at 2020, we can see we were nowhere near that 40-week mark. It took us a long time to move out of this range. Also note that we were trending upward in this range. Rune was outperforming Bitcoin, which is not what it's been doing for the last year, which is not what it's been doing since about March. The only reason I really included this is because technically it wasn't putting in higher highs. It double topped here before breaking out to the upside. Again, the range from the high to the low after the high was about 45-46%. And here we're measuring from the top to the bottom, how far we fell. So again, not too similar really. Soon after that, we got another downward trend, if you will. This one was even shorter. This one lasted about 19 weeks from the high to where we broke out of the trend. But here, funnily enough, we dropped about 70%, 69% is how far we dropped. Here we also dropped 69.9%. So basically the same move, very similar moves in terms of how far we fell. However, the time frame is just not similar. And I just can't visually compare this move to this move here. It's under half the length, and technically this could continue to go on for even longer. In fact, it will, basically, unless it moves up this week, which is possible, but again, I'm not relying on that to happen. I think we're probably going to follow this trend for a little bit longer. So then, if it's not this first one here, and it's not this second one that we got in 2020, the only one we have left really to compare to is the 2022-2023 decline. And this was really the only time as well where Rune actually really declined for any serious length of time. We also broke down to the low. We broke to the downside here. Similarly, how we also broke down to the downside on the US dollar chart. On the US dollar chart, we'd already broken out of this range to the low. Here we haven't broken out of this range yet, but it looks like we could. In 2023, we saw a drop of minus 60%. So again, not perfect, but not too dissimilar. And this took place over 37 weeks. Here we've been trading for 40. So again, these timeframes don't actually line up perfectly. However, again, if you want to shift the goalposts, if we say take another price range, measure it from this high that we first measured from, first high of the range, and bring it down to the actual all-time low, or sorry, the cycle low for Rune, we can see that's about a 73% drop. So we're actually much closer, and that does leave space for us to make another little move down to the downside. If you want to also measure how long it took us to get down to that 75% low, we can see bringing it along to the first week where we got to this low, it was 44 weeks. So an additional 7 weeks on top of when we broke out of this range. Now, potentially, we don't break out of this range. Potentially, we follow this for another 7 weeks. This then gives us wiggle room of about 4 weeks from our current week to drop an additional 4 or 5% from our low. If we take a 75% move down from, again, where we currently are, we take this move from the high down 75%, you can see that puts us at about 4,300 Satoshis. And if we project this on another 4 weeks, we can see that we would probably be hitting that low start of October. Now that's just a potential way Rune can play out. Though we can see in the 4-year cycle, it is pretty normal for our alts to start bottoming out from September to about December. that's when they bottom out. 2021, we can see it was basically December when we bottomed out, but we were also putting in lows, even lower lows, in October. So in my opinion, I think we could see one more leg down, putting us slightly lower, down to that 75% range of a drop down to that 4,300 Satoshi level, and then we could start to see a reversion. Again, this would be October time frame, like it was 4 years ago, but it also matches pretty similarly what we saw in 2023. Again, if we just slap on the dollar strength as well, we can see that we keep testing these lows here around the 100 level on the US dollar strength. We've actually just recently broken just above it. We've just bounced off it barely. Even though recently, just before that, we did technically wick down below. I think this continual testing of the DXY suggests a weakness. I think we'll probably get that move to the downside. And like last time, when we got that move to the downside, we saw Rune perform brilliantly along with the rest of the crypto space. I think that's also something worth looking at. All in all, for me, I think we'll probably see something similar to this play out. I think we'll probably be in, if not really close to a bull run by January of next year. It could happen before that. It could happen after January. It could be February, March. I don't know. We might need to see quite a few basis points cuts. And if we're getting, say, 25 basis points per month from now until the end of the year, that's only 1 basis point cut. We're sitting at 450. That's not really low enough for a bull run. If, say, we get 150, maybe we're down to 4 basis points. That's more realistic. We could start to see something happen then. Again, we were getting these types of rallies at 1.75 basis points. I just don't know, to be honest with you. It depends how quickly the Fed cuts rates. It depends on a lot of things. The only thing I know is that a lot of the indicators that I would look at are pointing towards the start of next year. Anyway, I've gone on for long enough. Thank you so much for watching until the end of the video. If you like the video, please leave a like. And let me know down below when you think this bull run is really going to actually take off or even take place. If you want to subscribe to the channel, you can click my face up here. And I really would appreciate it if you did click my face. Or you can click this video here. Google thinks you want to watch it, so most likely you probably want to watch that video. Either way, thanks so much, take care, and peace.
This is to all the watchers.
It won't make it in the video. Wow, what's the channel called?
IwanBundaMan?
Wow.
This is to all the watchers of IwanBundaMan. If I were you, I'd invest.
Litecoin!
No, I was going to say, like, invest in, like, getting a life. Like, put down your YouTube. This crypto's not going anywhere. I'm going to tell you now. That's my reasonable price prediction. None of it's worth it. Today, Litecoin!